I'm Suzuki, who works at a small inn in Kyoto. Today I'm going to tell you about an unforgettable event. Last summer, Joe came from Florida. He did something bad and was possessed by a Japanese evil spirit. Florida man arrives in Japan. Dangerous behavior. This inn is the best. Joe ran down the hall and lay down on the tatami mat with his shoes on. In Japan, you take your shoes off when you go in, I said. Joe just laughed and said, "Relax, relax, the Japanese are too formal." The next day, Joe went sightseeing in Kyoto. He came back in the evening excited. Today was the best day. I could take as many pictures as I wanted at the temple. I could go into the restricted area, and no one complained. Japan is heaven. I was stunned. The other staff members were also confused by Joe. He touched and hugged me, so often that women, especially, stopped approaching him. Of course, I became Joe's manager. His behavior became increasingly strange. Tomorrow I'll do something even more amazing. No one can stop me. That night I was so worried that I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get Joe's words out of my head. What in the world was he planning to do? And could no one stop him? When I arrived at the inn the next morning, I was a little relieved to find that Joe had already left for his sightseeing tour. But suddenly, the front desk rang. Worried, I answered the phone. "Hello, this is the police. Is Joe, a foreign tourist, staying at your hotel?" I was very surprised to get a call from the police. What had he done? I was at a loss. Then he caused a commotion at the temple, the police were called, and he was arrested. But it wasn't a big deal, so he was released. However, he seemed to be unwell, so they asked me to come and pick him up. When I explained the situation to the innkeeper, he said, "Please come and get me right away," so I had no choice but to go. I rushed to the police station and was given the details. Apparently, Joe had entered the inner sanctum of the temple, which was off limits, and touched a treasure that was strictly forbidden to be removed. "What's wrong?" "It's just a vase," Joe shouted. But suddenly his expression became worried. The temple grounds were in an uproar, and a tourist who had seen what was going on called the police. Then a person who appeared to be a temple worker came to explain the situation. As he began to suffer, black smoke-like things began to rise from his body. It is said that an evil spirit has been sealed in this treasure since ancient times. Anyone who touches it will be cursed. I hope nothing bad happens to him. I took the exhausted Joe back to the inn, but his face was pale and he looked sick. He feels heavy and his head feels like it's going to split open. I was worried and urged him to go to the hospital, but Joe wouldn't budge. As the sun set, Joe's condition worsened. "Mr. Suzuki, help me. Something is after me." He locked himself in his room, screaming occasionally. When he tried to go outside, he would suddenly become immobile or get a severe headache. As I watched Joe, I felt a mixture of fear and curiosity, wondering if he was really cursed. And if so, what the curse would do. Joe's condition worsened day by day. He locked himself in his room and barely ate. At night, screams echoed throughout the house. I ran to Joe's room and he was shaking and pointing to the wall. "Do you see it? There. A black shadow." I couldn't see anything, but Joe's fear was real. The next day, Joe suddenly tried to go outside, but as he approached the front door, he got a terrible headache and collapsed. "Help. I can't stand it anymore." Something more terrible happened that night. I heard Joe scream and ran over to him, and it seemed like something was wrapped around his neck. "I'm sorry. I won't do it again." Joe desperately begged for forgiveness and vowed to someone that he would change. I tentatively approached him and placed my hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, the air in the room seemed to freeze. Then something like black smoke appeared in front of Joe's eyes. "Please, forgive me." Joe's voice became hoarse and his face turned pale. At that moment, the black smoke was absorbed into his body. Joe convulsed and fell to the ground. I picked him up and cried out desperately, "Joe, stay strong." His body was cold and his pulse weak. Will this spiritual disturbance take Joe's life? Joe lost consciousness and was rushed to the hospital. But by the morning, he had recovered as if nothing had happened. I was surprised that the hospital bill was less than 10,000 yen. When we returned to the inn, he asked me to teach him Japanese etiquette. After an hour of preaching, he seemed to deeply regret his actions and even said, "Mr. Suzuki, I want to go to the temple. I want to apologize for the treasure." I left work early to accompany Joe. We went to the temple together. The head priest looked at Joe with a stern expression, but seemed moved by his sincerity. Your actions are unforgivable, but you seem truly repentant." Joe bowed his head and said words of repentance. After that, the purification ceremony was conducted in a solemn atmosphere. When the ceremony was over, Joe's face brightened. "Miss Suzuki, I can't believe this feeling. I feel light. My headache is gone." Joe spent the rest of the day sightseeing in peace and returned to Florida the next day. I witnessed the change in him and was convinced that this experience had changed his life forever. 1 year later, I received an unexpected letter. "Mr. Suzuki, I was a really bad person. I'm ashamed. When I returned to Florida, many people told me that I had become a completely different person. Now I volunteer with a Japanese couple who teach Japanese culture. I teach people about Japanese traditions and etiquette. Isn't that ironic?" I couldn't help but laugh at how Joe, who was born in the 90s, had become a missionary of Japanese culture. Now that I think about it, I've been having strange dreams ever since. I'm in a dimly lit cave temple with a stern old monk staring at me. Hearing these words sent shivers down my spine. Had Joe's spiritual problems really disappeared? Perhaps the Japanese spirits followed Joe to Florida and are still watching him closely? This mysterious incident left a deep impression on me. Don't underestimate ancient Japanese folklore and spiritual phenomena. It was an unforgettable summer incident that made me realize this.
One day, Yura suddenly fell in love with a mannequin's head. She displayed it in her home, but a series of strange phenomena began to occur. The horror was intricately intertwined with Yura's dark past. Life with a mannequin head. One day, Yura went to an art museum. There were many homeless people living near the museum, and there were several cardboard houses on the corners of the street. The Yura found a mannequin head with long hair and a beautiful face like Brigitte Barda. Yura fell in love at first sight and decided to take it home. That day, Yura was content to display it on a shelf. But as time passed, she began to talk to Brigitte. But one day, 2 months later, a rift appeared in the lives of Yura and Brigitte. Yura was actually a homosexual and had a girlfriend named Rilko, and for the first time, she came to visit them. When Rilko came to visit, without hiding her identity as Brigitte, Yura was in a good mood. And Rilko seemed to be in a good mood as well. However, the moment Rilko saw Brigitte, her face changed color, and she showed a rejection reaction. However, seeing how obsessed Yura was with Brigitte, Rilko thought that something was clearly wrong and decided to go along with it. The next morning, Rilko stopped Yura as she was about to say goodbye and quickly left. Later, when Yura went to the front door to leave, she noticed something. Brigitte was gone. In a panic, she searched for Brigitte, and after searching for her, Yura hurriedly called Rilko, thinking that Rilko had taken Brigitte away. It turned out that Rilko had indeed abandoned Brigitte. Rilko gave Yura a stern warning. Yura calmed down and thought nothing of the doll anymore, even wondering why she was so attracted to it. But that all changed. One night, when she happened to open the curtains, something caught her eye. It was Brigitte. Brigitte was on the balcony. Yura was just so happy that Brigitte had returned. Normally she would have wondered, but she didn't think anything of it. The story jumps forward to one day. Yura has a gay friend named Kotaro, who invites her for a ride, and they decide to go. The next day, Yura is taken somewhere without being told where. After a while, they arrive in front of a dimly lit tunnel. It is a haunted place. Yura doesn't like haunted places, but she has no choice but to go inside. The car continues into the tunnel, but Kotaro stops the car in the middle of the tunnel. As if he has become stronger, the two decide to go home, but they feel a presence on top of the car. Then the roof of the car is hit. The two scream and Yura yells at Kotaro to get out of the car. But Kotaro is shaking and can't move. Yura shakes Kotaro from the backseat and somehow manages to get the car moving again. However, they are almost crushed by the ceiling again, but they manage to escape the tunnel. The two sit on a bench in a 24-hour supermarket and start talking. They decide to get an exorcism. Yura starts to search the internet for shrines where they can be exorcised, while Kotaro sends messages to his friends. It was already morning. Then Ryoko called. She wanted to take Yura somewhere and asked if she could take the day off. Ryoko seemed serious, but Yura and the others only had the idea of exorcising her, so they declined the invitation. However, Ryoko wouldn't back down, so they explained what happened in the tunnel and told her that they wanted to go for an exorcism. To their surprise, Ryoko wanted to take them to an exorcism as well. The two decided to take the day off work and go to an exorcism. At the meeting place, Ryoko and the friend Kotaro had sent a message to her there. Kotaro's friend was a boxer, and Ida was a reliable, handsome, bearded gay man. Ryoko said that after he left Bridget, he had talked to some friends about Yura and decided to go for an exorcism. Then Yura remembered that Bridget had returned. When I told Ryoko about this, she was at a loss for words. Yura told Kotaro and Ida about Bridget, and decided to take Bridget for an exorcism as well. Then they drove with Ida's car to Yura's house. After picking up Bridget at Yura's house, the four of them drove away in peace. However, about 5 minutes from the place of the exorcism, something strange happened again. Bang! Bang! There was another sound of something hitting the ceiling of the car. After a while, the sound of hitting stopped. But this time there was a soft sound of someone stepping on something. After a while, the steps stopped. Kotaro seemed to be quite scared, but they reached their destination safely. It was not a shrine, but an ordinary house. When Ryoko went to ring the doorbell, Karyu came out of the house. Yura and the others talked a lot about what had happened so far. After listening to them, Karyu led the four into the house. The house was filled with soft colors, and the four could finally calm down. Kotaro thought that he was entirely responsible for going to the haunted place, and Karyu comforted him while he cried. Then Karyu said something surprising. He said that Kotaro was not the real problem. The four of them thought that the haunted place was the cause, so they didn't know what to do. Then Karyu turned to Yura and said, "You are the cause." Looking at Bridget, whom Yura was holding, Karyu asked Yura if anything strange had happened around them so far. But Yura couldn't think of anything in particular. Karyu asked if anyone who had hurt her or tried to hurt her had had a terrible experience. Then Yura remembered. A few years ago, 3 men who had tried to rape Yura had all died. Yura had come out to her family as a homosexual. Her father, troubled by this, consulted an acquaintance. When the friend's son heard this, he thought that a lesbian would like men if she met a man. So he gathered 2 of his friends and planned to rape Yura. Yura was on her way when a car stopped next to her, and she was dragged into the car by her hair and clothes. But she panicked and struggled desperately in the moving car. Then the incident happened. The driver was kicked by the violent Yura and made a driving mistake, causing the car to crash into a telephone pole. The driver's leg was crushed and he was left disabled and took his own life. One of the friends was raped and killed by a stranger. The perpetrator was heterosexual and mentally ill, and was in a state where he could not respond properly. The other was killed in a car bomb. After hearing this story, Karyu said, "This is going too well. It's as if someone took revenge on you instead." Yura was frightened by Karyu's words. Karyu also said that the perpetrators had done terrible things to other people besides Yura, and that there were other victims, and the unborn babies of the victims were behind Yura. Karyu-san said that the 3 criminals had done other dangerous things, and that there were more crimes to be committed, which was the reason why many people had died. However, seeing that Yura's life was saved even after being attacked, the spirits may have been jealous of her. That's why they said they followed her, but not in a bad way. They were probably on her side. The dolls probably misunderstood that the ghosts had been given a place to live. Yura was attracted to the dolls because she agreed with them. It's also unclear what was hitting the roof of the car, but it was probably the stomping sound of the unborn babies, following Yura, trying to protect her from whatever was hitting her. After hearing Karyusan's story, Yura and the others were scared, but they were able to perform the exorcism safely. After that, Yura and the others were able to live peacefully without incident. And Kotaro vowed never to go to a haunted place again. However, Karyu took in Bridget, who had become the home of a ghost. And this time she never returned, and peaceful days return. If you have any strange stories close to you, please leave a comment. Any other opinions or comments would be very encouraging. Thanks for watching.